Imagine this, a small plane, just two men on board, and a mission so dangerous it seemed impossible. Even in the daring days of the late 1950s, this wasn't just about fuel. It was about sleep deprivation, freezing December nights, and the razor-thin line between life and death. The question was simple. Could these two pilots break a record that everyone thought was untouchable? Or would their aircraft vanish forever into the blue sky? Today, we uncover a strange chapter in aviation history, one that has been buried in dusty archives for decades. In 1956, a man named Warren Bailey opened a small hotel in Las Vegas. Unlike the city's flashy, high-roller resorts, Bailey's Place, the hacienda catered to everyday working folks. It was affordable, friendly, and not exactly a money-making machine. To boost business, Bailey was always looking for creative publicity stunts. Then, one day, his friend Bob Tim, a former Army pilot, pitched an idea. What if we break the world record for the longest nonstop airplane flight? The concept was wild, keeping a plane in the air, not for days, but for months, without ever touching the ground. Bailey loved it. If it worked, the hacienda would get national attention. But could it actually be done? When airplanes were first invented, flight times were measured in seconds. Over the years, planes improved, and endurance flights became a way to prove both engineering and piloting skill. By the 1920s, the challenge shifted to fuel. In 1923, the U.S. Army solved this by perfecting mid-air refueling one plane passing fuel to another while still flying. Soon after, the first endurance flight record was set when ADH-4B stayed airborne for 37 hours with 9 refueling sessions. America caught the endurance fever. In 1929 alone, the record was broken 5 times. But by the time Tim proposed the idea to Bailey, the hype had faded. Now, it wasn't about mechanical limits, it was about human endurance. The record to beat had been set in 1949, when 2 Navy pilots kept a plane called the Aronca Sedan in the air for 46 days straight. Their feat made national headlines. Bailey agreed to sponsor the mission and asked Tim to be the pilot. Tim bought a Cessna 172 from McCarran Field Airport and hired a mechanic to modify it for months-long flight. They removed the co-pilot's seat to make room for sleeping quarters, since the 2 pilots would take turns flying and resting on a foam pad. The rear bench was stripped out to create an 8-square-foot storage area for supplies, and a tiny sink was added so they could wash up as much as you can in a 4-foot-high cabin. They also installed a massive 95-gallon belly tank under the plane for extra fuel, along with an electric winch to pull up the refueling hose during mid-air transfers. To reach the fuel port, they replaced the co-pilot's door with a folding one that opened directly to the tank. In those days, standing on a platform outside a flying plane wasn't just a Hollywood stunt, it was real. To make it safer, they built a small fold-out platform by the co-pilot's door so the hose could be connected while standing outside. The engine got upgrades, and in big bold letters they painted Hacienda on the plane, the whole point of the mission. Test flights began in the summer of 1958, but problems came fast. Tim and his first co-pilot didn't get along, and arguments in the cramped cabin were constant. The first 2 test flights failed, and during the third, the tension boiled over. Tim fired his co-pilot mid-mission. On top of that, the engine's exhaust valve kept overheating, forcing them to land early each time. While Tim struggled, another team in Dallas, Jim Heath and Bill Burkhart, stayed airborne for 50 days in the exact same model of Cessna 172, breaking the old record. Now Tim's challenge was even bigger. By December, Tim had ironed out the technical issues and found a new co-pilot, John Cook. On December 4, 1958, they officially began their record attempt, with officials from the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale on hand to monitor the flight. To prevent cheating, Tim and Cook took off, then immediately landed back on the runway so a chase car could paint their tire treads white. If they touched down at any point, the paint would scrape off and the record attempt would be invalid. 12 hours later, it was time for the first refueling. They flew low over a straight stretch of road where a refueling truck was waiting. As they approached, the truck driver floored it, matching the plane's minimum speed of 62 miles per hour, the fastest the truck could manage. When the Hacienda flew just 20 feet above the truck, It all started with a dangerous mid-air refueling maneuver. Co-pilot dropped a winch line down to a truck speeding along the desert highway below. On the ground, workers attached a fuel hose to the winch, which was then pulled back up and connected to the plane's belly tank. Once the hose was secure, the signal was given to turn on the pump. For 3 intense minutes, the plane and the truck had to stay perfectly aligned. One wrong move, one slip in speed, and the results could be fatal. When the tank was full, the co-pilot dropped the hose back to the truck, and the little aircraft climbed back into the open sky, ready for another long stretch. If they wanted to break the 50-day endurance record, they'd have to repeat this dangerous routine at least 100 times. At first, they circled over Las Vegas, just in case they needed a quick landing. Once they were confident the plane was holding up, they spent more time over California's empty desert plains. Flying higher improved fuel efficiency, but up there the temperatures were freezing, and due to modifications, the plane's insulation was terrible. To stay warm, they flew lower. But low-altitude flying at night meant mountains and clouds could turn deadly in seconds. As the days went on, the two pilots became close friends. In their spare time, they read books, exercised, and talked for hours. During refueling runs, they'd also haul up more than just fuel, containers of water, engine oil, and even fresh meals cooked by the Hacienda Hotel chef. And yes, the question everyone has, how did they handle the bathroom situation? They kept a folding camp toilet on board with a waste bag underneath. Once full, the bag was discreetly emptied over the remote California desert. This detail only came out years later, after the co-pilot's wife shared the story. By day 36, they'd celebrated New Year's Eve in the cramped cabin, but fatigue and stress were starting to show. Sleep was rare, the engine noise was constant, and the space was barely big enough to stretch. One night, exhaustion nearly cost them everything. Tim, the pilot, fell asleep at the controls, just minutes before the co-pilot's shift. Amazingly, the plane flew straight on autopilot for over an hour, until Tim woke up to find himself flying dangerously low inside an unknown canyon. If he'd slept a few minutes longer, they would have slammed into the mountainside, because autopilot only kept the plane level, not away from obstacles. On day 39, disaster struck. The generator failed. No generator meant no radio, no lights, no fuel pump to transfer fuel from the belly tank to the wings. Ground crew sent up a small wind turbine, but it could only power the radios. The pilots had to hand pump fuel the rest of the trip, and without lights, night refueling was almost impossible, especially on moonless nights. They improvised by strapping a flashlight to the winch so the crew could see where to attach the hose. They also sent a second truck ahead with a massive searchlight to guide the refueling runs. But the problems kept piling up. The fuel gauge failed. The tachometer died, carbon buildup started in the engine. Finally, on January 23rd, the moment arrived. They broke the 50-day world record. The Hacienda Hotel, which sponsored the flight, made sure everyone knew, publishing their route over major cities so people could look up and witness history. At one point, a photographer plane joined them to capture incredible images. The co-pilot even pretended to clean the windshield mid-flight for the cameras, and newspapers across the country printed the shot. But they weren't done yet. Instead of landing, they decided to keep going for 14 more days. By February 7, 1959, the aircraft was worn out. After 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes, and 5 seconds, they finally radioed McCarran Field for landing clearance. When they touched down, a massive crowd was waiting: reporters, record officials, cheering supporters, Tim's wife and kids, and the entire Hacienda Hotel staff. The two men were so physically drained they couldn't climb out of the cockpit without help. Officials confirmed the white paint on the landing gear tires was untouched, proof they hadn't landed once during the entire flight. In 2015, the Aviation Authority officially retired the endurance record category because it was simply too dangerous, meaning Tim and Cook's record will stand forever. Today, the very Cessna 172 they flew hangs proudly in the baggage claim area of McCarran International Airport S Terminal 1, still telling its story to anyone who stops to look up. This is one of those stories that makes you realize just how far determination and a little bit of crazy can take you. If you enjoyed this journey into aviation history, hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible true stories, and tell us in the comments, would you have the guts to spend over 2 months in a plane without landing?